Mafia boss sees his maid eating in the rain. What he discovers breaks his heart. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. In a quiet corner of the luxurious mansion, the rain poured relentlessly outside, soaking everything in its path. The grand estate, complete with marble floors and gold-accented fixtures, stood in stark contrast to the dreary weather. Inside, everything was perfect, as always, except for the small, unnoticed figure who had become invisible to the world. Maria, the maid, sat by the back door, her knees drawn to her chest as she held a small, battered bowl of soup. The food was lukewarm, the steam long gone, but she ate it anyway, silently. The rain splattered against the windows, and the cold, biting air seeped in through the cracks. Yet, she didn't mind. It wasn't the first time she had eaten her meals like this. The others in the household had no idea, and she preferred it that way. She wasn't meant to be seen or heard. The mansion's grandeur was reserved for those with power, not for someone like her. As she scooped another spoonful of soup, she noticed the soft thud of footsteps approaching. Her heart skipped a beat. Maria quickly glanced up, but her eyes widened in shock as she saw him standing there. Alexander De Luca, the Mafia boss, the man who owned everything, including this mansion. His sharp gaze met hers, and she froze, the spoon still hovering near her mouth. For a moment, neither of them moved. He looked at her with a mix of curiosity and something else, something she couldn't quite place. She quickly lowered her gaze, feeling her cheeks burn with shame. She had no right to be seen like this. She had no right to be caught eating alone in the rain. But to her surprise, Alexander didn't turn away or berate her like she expected. Instead, he stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. His presence, so commanding and cold, seemed to fill the entire space. "You're eating out here?" His voice was calm, almost too calm. Maria swallowed hard and nodded, though she didn't speak. She couldn't find the words, not with him standing there, looking down at her as if he were truly seeing her for the first time. For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain and the faint rustling of her clothes as she shifted uncomfortably. Alexander knelt down beside her, his gaze softening ever so slightly. "Why didn't you eat inside with everyone else?" he asked. Maria opened her mouth to answer, but found herself unable to speak. The words didn't come, and she felt her heart race. What could she say? That she didn't belong inside with the others? That she had learned to stay out of sight, out of mind? Instead, she only shook her head. But Alexander didn't push her. He didn't seem angry or disappointed, as she had expected. He only stared at her for a moment longer, and then, in an unexpected move, he placed his hand on the bowl. "You should be inside, where it's warm. Come on, I'll have someone bring you a proper meal." Maria's breath caught in her throat, but before she could protest, he stood up and gestured toward the mansion's door. She hesitated, unsure of what to do. But something about his calm demeanor, his lack of judgment, made her stand and follow him, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know why he was being kind to her, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope, just a little. Maria followed Alexander through the grand hallway of the mansion, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. Her heart was racing, but not from fear this time. She had never felt so conflicted. Was she really walking into the warmth of the house? Or was this just some fleeting kindness that would disappear as soon as it had appeared? As they reached the dining room, she noticed the grand table set with crystal, silver, and an array of dishes that smelled delicious. It was a stark contrast to the small, simple meal she had just eaten outside. She stopped at the doorway, unsure whether she should enter. She had never felt she belonged inside these walls. "Come in." Alexander's voice interrupted her thoughts. His tone was gentle, almost coaxing, but still firm. "You don't need to be out there alone." Maria hesitated for a moment longer before she stepped into the room. The warmth of the space hit her immediately, and for the first time in what felt like ages, she let herself relax just a little. She didn't know how to act in such an opulent setting. She was just a maid. A small voice in her head told her to stay in the background, to remain invisible. But something about Alexander's presence made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could stand there without being looked down upon. As they walked further into the room, Alexander's personal chef, a tall man with short-cropped hair, greeted them. "Dinner is served, sir," the chef said with a polite nod. Alexander turned to Maria and gestured to the empty seat at the table. "Please sit. You must be hungry." Maria glanced at him, unsure if he was truly serious. He was offering her a seat at the same table as his guests, at the same table where the powerful men and women of his world gathered. She had never imagined this day would come. She had spent years working in the shadows, never allowed to sit at the table, never allowed to even look a guest in the eye. But here she was, being offered a place. I don't know if I should," Maria stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just a maid." Alexander's gaze softened as he watched her, and for a moment, he said nothing. Then, with a small smile, he said, "You're a person, Maria, and you've earned a seat at this table, just like anyone else. Don't deny yourself the chance to eat something good." His words, simple and direct, took Maria by surprise. She had expected a reprimand, perhaps a reminder of her place, but instead, he was treating her as an equal. She sat down slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was filled with a quiet hum of conversation as the other guests talked amongst themselves, completely unaware of the quiet, almost sacred moment happening at the far end of the table. Maria tried to keep her head down, feeling the weight of the situation press down on her. Alexander sat across from her, his eyes occasionally flicking toward her as if he were ensuring she was comfortable. The food was exquisite. A delicate soup to start, followed by a perfectly cooked steak, accompanied by mashed potatoes that melted in her mouth. For the first time in a long time, Maria allowed herself to enjoy a meal without guilt, without worrying about the next task on her to-do list. As she ate, she couldn't help but feel the tension in her chest slowly ease. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, a feeling of being cared for, of being seen. When she finished her meal, Alexander stood and gestured for her to follow him. "Come with me," he said. "There's something I want to show you." Maria stood hesitantly, unsure of what was happening. They walked through the mansion, passing elegant portraits on the walls and rooms filled with antiques. They finally arrived at a small, quiet study near the back of the house. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and a large desk sat in the middle of the room, papers neatly stacked on top. Alexander gestured for her to sit in the chair across from him. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice low and calm. "I see how hard you work, how you always put others before yourself. But you deserve more than just being a maid, Maria. You deserve to have a future, a chance to be more than just someone cleaning my floors." Maria blinked in surprise, her mouth dry. She had never imagined Alexander could see her this way. She had always been invisible to him, just a shadow in the background. But now, as she looked at him, she saw something different in his eyes. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even sympathy. It was something she had never expected. Respect. "You've earned my respect," he continued. "And I want to help you. Whatever you need, I will do what I can." Maria's heart raced. She had never imagined this day would come, never imagined someone like him would offer her this kind of chance. But now, as she sat across from him, the weight of his words was starting to sink in. She had spent so many years thinking she wasn't worthy of anything more than the role she had been given. But now, for the first time, she wondered if she could actually have a different life. A life where she wasn't just a maid. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alexander gave her a small nod, his expression softening. "You don't need to thank me. You've earned this, Maria. More than anyone else I know." Maria sat there for a moment, processing his words. Could this really be happening? Could her life really change, just like that? She didn't know, but for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it could. As Maria sat in the small study, her mind was racing with the possibilities that Alexander's words had opened up. For years, she had lived in the shadows, only existing to serve others, and now, she was being offered something she had never imagined, a chance at a new life. Alexander stood by the window, looking out over the estate, his figure casting a long shadow in the dim light. Maria could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened as he gazed out. It was as though he was waiting for something, but she wasn't sure what. She cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice still trembling slightly. Alexander turned toward her, a soft smile on his lips. Now, Maria, you start thinking about what you want. I'm not going to just give you a handout. I want you to take control of your own future. He walked over to the desk, where papers were scattered neatly, and picked up a folder. This is yours if you want it, he said, sliding it across the table. Maria's eyes widened as she saw the documents inside. It was a proposal, something official. I'm offering you a chance to work with me. You'll be handling important aspects of my operations. I know you've been doing things behind the scenes for years, but now I want you in the light. You'll be a partner, not a servant. Maria felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had never imagined herself in a position of power, certainly not one that involved business operations for someone like Alexander. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I've always been in the background. I don't know how to step into something like this. Alexander sat down across from her, his gaze steady. You're stronger than you realize. You've been playing a role your whole life, Maria, but now it's time to stop hiding. You've done more for me than most people ever will. I trust you. His words were simple but impactful. Maria's heart pounded in her chest. She had never been trusted with such a responsibility, and the weight of it felt almost overwhelming. I don't even know where to begin, she confessed, her hands shaking as she looked down at the papers. Alexander leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. We'll start with small steps. I'll guide you through it. And if you ever feel uncertain, you come to me. I'm not leaving you to figure this out on your own. He stood up and walked to the window again, his back to her. I know this isn't easy, but you're not alone anymore. You have a chance to shape your future, Maria. Maria took a deep breath, the reality of the situation sinking in. She had spent so many years living in fear of being noticed, of being caught, but now she was being given a chance to be something more, something different. She had always dreamt of more than this life, but had never believed it was possible. But now, Alexander had opened a door for her, and she couldn't help but wonder if she was finally ready to walk through it. She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his for the first time without hesitation. I'll try, she said quietly. Alexander turned, his eyes softening. That's all I ask. He walked toward her, the tension in his shoulders easing as he reached for the folder and slid it into her hands. Take your time. Think it over. But remember, there's no turning back once you make this choice. Maria nodded, feeling the weight of his words. It wasn't just about the opportunity he was offering her. It was about everything that would change if she took the leap. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel trapped. She felt like she had a choice, like she could make her own path. As she sat there, the papers in her hands felt heavy, but they also felt like a key. She could feel her life starting to change, in ways she couldn't even fully understand yet. Alexander gave her a final look before walking toward the door. I'll give you space to think. Take your time. Maria watched him leave, the door clicking softly behind him. She was alone now, but not in the way she had been before. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just a maid. She was Maria, and for the first time in her life, she had the chance to be something more. Maria sat at the desk, the folder Alexander had given her open in front of her. She had spent the past few hours staring at the papers, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite keep up with. The mansion was quiet now, the house staff gone for the night, and she was alone in the study, trying to process what had just happened. Her hands were trembling as she ran them over the papers, feeling the weight of the decision in front of her. It was real. Alexander wasn't joking. He wanted her to be part of his operation, to help manage his empire. The thought made her head spin. She had spent so many years working in the background, never even thinking she could be part of something like this. It was a far cry from scrubbing floors and serving meals. But now, she was being given the opportunity to make a choice. She could take the job, work beside him, and change her life forever. Or she could walk away and remain in the same place she had always been. It wasn't just a job offer, it was a new life. But the idea of stepping out from the shadows terrified her. What if she failed? What if she wasn't cut out for it? She wasn't used to being in charge, wasn't used to making decisions that would affect more than just herself. But then again, had she ever been given a choice before? No, not really. She had always been at the mercy of others, working for them, serving them, never asking for anything in return. She had learned to keep her head down and stay invisible, always careful not to draw attention to herself. But now, Alexander had seen something in her. He trusted her. He believed in her potential. That belief was both a blessing and a burden. Maria felt the weight of it. She had never felt that kind of responsibility before. And yet, she couldn't deny the pull it had on her. She wanted to prove to herself that she could do more than just clean and cook. She wanted to show that she was capable of something greater, that she had more to offer than just her labor. But as she sat there, staring at the papers, the doubts crept back in. She wasn't ready. She wasn't prepared for this kind of life. She had spent so long being nothing more than a maid that the idea of becoming something else seemed impossible. But then, she thought about Alexander. She thought about the way he had looked at her, the way he had spoken to her, not as a servant, but as an equal. She thought about the small gestures he had made, the kindness in his voice, the way he had treated her with respect. She had never experienced that before, not from someone in his position. It was a rare thing, and it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maria closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She didn't have to decide right now. She could take her time, think it over, and see where it led. But something told her that this opportunity was one she couldn't pass up. She stood up, closing the folder and placing it carefully on the desk. She walked over to the window and gazed out at the rain, watching the droplets race down the glass. It was a cold, dark night, but the mansion behind her felt warm, safe even. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. And as she stood there, she made a decision. She was going to take that chance. She was going to prove to herself that she was more than just a maid. She was going to embrace this opportunity, no matter how terrifying it seemed. The next morning, Maria walked into the dining room with a sense of purpose. She had made up her mind. She would work with Alexander. She would help him with his operations, and in doing so, she would finally take control of her own destiny. As she walked to the table, Alexander looked up from his papers and smiled. "You've made your decision?" he asked, his voice steady but full of expectation. Maria nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and confident. "I'm in." Alexander's smile widened, and for the first time, Maria felt like she belonged. She wasn't just another servant in the house. She was part of something bigger. And as she sat down to discuss the details of her new role, she knew that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Maria had spent the last few days adjusting to her new role, learning the ins and outs of Alexander's operations. It was nothing like what she had imagined. There were no grand meetings or flashy deals. Instead, she found herself submerged in the details, managing schedules, reviewing documents, and coordinating with trusted members of the team. Alexander had been patient with her, guiding her through everything. His presence was always steady, reassuring, but Maria could still feel the weight of the responsibility pressing on her shoulders. Each morning, she woke up with a new challenge, but with each challenge, she also grew more confident. It was becoming clear to her that this was more than just a job. It was a chance to reshape her life, to build something for herself that was bigger than anything she had ever dreamed. But with that came the pressure. The pressure to succeed, to prove that she wasn't just another maid, to prove that she belonged in this world. One evening, as she sat in Alexander's study, working through a stack of papers, he entered, his footsteps echoing softly in the room. She looked up from her work and met his gaze. He smiled, a rare, warm smile that made her feel like she was more than just an employee to him. "How are you adjusting?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Maria put down her pen, thinking carefully before responding. "It's been overwhelming," she admitted. "But I'm learning. I'm starting to feel like I'm actually making a difference." Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You are. You've been handling everything better than I expected. I knew you had potential from the beginning." Maria felt a rush of pride at his words, but she quickly reminded herself that it was only the beginning. She still had so much to learn. "Thank you," she said, offering a small smile. "I just don't want to let you down." Alexander walked over to the desk and sat down across from her. "You're not letting me down, Maria," he said, his tone serious. "But I need to know something. You've been working with me for a while now, and I want to ask, what do you want for yourself?" Maria blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" she asked, unsure how to answer. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense but kind. "You've been so focused on helping me and my business, but I want to know, what do you want for yourself? What are your dreams?" Maria felt a lump form in her throat. She had never really thought about it. For so long, she had been stuck in survival mode, focused only on getting through each day. But now, as she sat across from Alexander, she realized that she had never given herself the chance to think beyond that. What did she want? What were her dreams? I don't really know, she said, her voice soft. I've never really had the chance to think about it. I've always just done what was expected of me. Alexander nodded, understanding. That's exactly why I'm asking. You've spent your life living for others, Maria. But now, it's time to live for yourself. What do you want? Maria stared at the desk for a long moment, her mind racing. She had never asked herself that question before. She had always been content to simply exist, to do the work, to stay in the background. But now, as she sat in this luxurious room with Alexander, she realized that she had been hiding from her own desires. She didn't want to just be a maid anymore. She wanted more than that. She wanted to make a name for herself, to build something she could call her own. She wanted to be independent, not just financially, but in every sense. She wanted to prove to herself that she could do something beyond cleaning and serving. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted a life where she wasn't always in the shadows. She looked up at Alexander, meeting his gaze with newfound determination. I want to build something for myself, she said, her voice steady. I want to be more than just someone who cleans and serves. I want to create something that's mine, something that I can be proud of. Alexander smiled, a look of approval in his eyes. Good, he said. That's exactly what I want to hear. And I'll help you get there, Maria. I'll guide you every step of the way. But remember, it starts with you. You have to take the first step. Maria felt a surge of hope rise within her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had control over her future. She wasn't just going to survive anymore. She was going to live. Thank you, she said quietly, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I'm ready. Alexander stood up and walked toward the door, turning to look at her one last time. Good. Let's get to work, Maria. As he left the room, Maria sat back in her chair, the weight of the world suddenly feeling a little lighter. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but for the first time, she was excited to find out. Maria woke up earlier than usual the next morning, a mix of excitement and nervousness making it difficult to stay asleep. The mansion was still quiet, the usual hum of activity nowhere to be heard. She stood in front of the mirror in her small room, her reflection staring back at her, unsure of what to expect as she moved forward in this new role. It felt like the beginning of something she had never even allowed herself to imagine, working alongside Alexander, managing pieces of his empire. Her heart raced as she thought about what had transpired in the past week. No longer just the maid, she had stepped into a position of responsibility, of trust, and it was terrifying. But in her chest, there was also something else, hope. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was on the edge of something big, something real. She had already made her decision. She was ready. As she walked down the long hallway toward the main office, her shoes clicking softly on the marble floor, she found herself thinking back to the first few days she had spent in the mansion. It felt like a different world now, one where she no longer felt invisible. The people who once barely acknowledged her were now respecting her, looking to her for answers, asking her opinions. The thought was both thrilling and overwhelming. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. It was strange, unfamiliar, but for once, it was a good kind of strange. Alexander had given her space to breathe, to find her way, but he also pushed her to take charge, to act with authority. Today was her first real challenge. She had to oversee a meeting of high-level associates that Alexander had scheduled, to make decisions, and to prove that she could manage the responsibilities he had trusted her with. As she entered the office, she was greeted by two of Alexander's closest associates, both men who had worked with him for years. The look they gave her was a mixture of curiosity and respect. They knew who she was, Alexander's maid. But now, they were seeing her in a new light. She walked over to the table where a series of documents were laid out, each one more important than the last. The room was quiet, the tension palpable. This was her moment. As the men sat down and looked at her, she felt the weight of the situation settle on her shoulders. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Gentlemen, she began, her voice calm but confident. We have a lot to discuss today. These decisions are crucial to the success of our operations. I expect all of us to be on the same page. The two men exchanged a glance, but said nothing. They were waiting for her to continue, waiting to see if she had the ability to lead. Maria felt her heart pound in her chest, but she kept her composure. She was no longer the maid, no longer invisible. She was in charge now. Let's start with the financial projections for the next quarter, she said, looking down at the first document. I've reviewed the figures, and I believe there are a few areas where we can improve our efficiency. As she spoke, her mind raced, calculating the best way to present her thoughts. She wasn't just reciting numbers. She was making decisions that would impact the future of their operations. Every word she spoke carried weight. As she discussed strategies and plans, Maria could feel the respect in the room growing. The men who had once seen her as nothing more than a servant were now listening to her, nodding along with her suggestions. The feeling was foreign to her, but it was exhilarating. The meeting went smoothly, and when it was over, the two men stood up and shook her hand. Good work, Maria, one of them said, a look of genuine respect in his eyes. You handled yourself well. She smiled, the sense of accomplishment washing over her. Thank you. I appreciate your feedback. As they left the room, Alexander entered, his usual confident stride matching the authority in his presence. Well done, he said, a proud smile on his face. Maria felt her cheeks flush. She had done it. She had stepped up and proved that she could handle the responsibility. But more than that, she had earned something far more valuable, respect. I'm proud of you, Alexander continued. You're doing exactly what I knew you were capable of. But this is just the beginning. We have much more to accomplish together. Maria looked at him, her mind still racing from the meeting. I won't let you down, she said, her voice steady. Alexander nodded, his smile never fading. I know you won't. And remember, you're not doing this alone. I'm here to guide you. As he left the room, Maria stood there for a moment, taking it all in. For the first time, she felt like she was truly in control of her life. This wasn't just a job. This was her future. She had taken her first steps towards something she never thought possible, and there was no turning back now. She was no longer invisible. She was Maria, and she was going to make a name for herself. Maria woke up early the next morning, the soft rays of sunlight slipping through the curtains of her small room. It was still quiet in the mansion, and for a moment, everything felt calm and still, as if she were the only one awake in a world that had somehow shifted around her. The day before had been a whirlwind, a series of small victories and moments of doubt that had led her to this point. She had proven herself in that meeting. She had handled the pressure, made decisions that mattered, and for the first time, felt like she truly belonged. But today, Maria knew, would be different. She could already feel the weight of what she had to do next. As she stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling estate, she could sense that Alexander's expectations of her were growing. This wasn't just about handling a meeting anymore. She was beginning to become a key figure in his operations, someone who would have a say in the direction everything moved. That thought both thrilled and terrified her. What if she failed? What if she wasn't enough? She quickly pushed those thoughts aside. There was no time for doubt. Maria dressed in her usual black outfit, the uniform she had worn for years, though now it felt different. It was no longer just a symbol of her role as a servant. It was becoming a symbol of her transformation, a step towards something more. As she walked down the hallway to the office, she was greeted by the familiar faces of the staff, some of whom nodded at her with a new respect. They knew who she was, but now they were starting to see her as someone more than just a maid. The world around her was changing, and it was both exciting and overwhelming. When she reached the office, Alexander was already there, his sharp eyes focused on a set of documents spread out in front of him. He looked up as she entered, offering her a smile that was both reassuring and encouraging. Morning, Maria, he said, his voice calm as always. I've got another project for you today. It's important. I need you to handle it. Maria nodded, trying to mask the nerves she could feel rising in her chest. What is it? She asked, walking toward the desk. Alexander slid a folder across to her. This is a deal we've been working on with a few of our associates. It's an investment opportunity, but it needs someone who can keep track of the details and make sure things stay on course. I want you to oversee it. Maria looked at the folder in front of her, her heart pounding. This was bigger than anything she had done before. She had been trusted with a major part of the business, and the stakes felt high. She couldn't afford to mess this up. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady despite the swirl of emotions inside her. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment before nodding. I know you will. I trust you, Maria. His words hit her like a wave. Trust. That was what she had earned. And now, it was time to prove she was worthy of it. Maria took a deep breath, opened the folder, and began to review the documents inside. The numbers, the names, the details, they were all important, and she knew she had to pay close attention. But as she scanned through the pages, something caught her eye. A discrepancy. A small one, but enough that it made her pause. She reread the line again, her mind racing. It was a slight inconsistency in the projected figures, something that didn't add up. Maria felt a sense of urgency rise within her. She wasn't just going to overlook this. She stood up and walked over to Alexander's desk, the folder in her hands. There's something here I think we need to look at, she said, her voice firm. Alexander raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. What did you find? He asked. Maria pointed to the figures on the page. This section doesn't match the projections we discussed last week. The numbers don't align. Alexander took the folder from her, his gaze flicking over the figures. He was silent for a moment, and Maria held her breath, waiting for his reaction. Finally, he looked up, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. You're right. I missed that. Good catch, Maria. That's exactly what I was hoping for. Maria felt a rush of pride. She had caught something important, something that could have been easily overlooked. She had proven her worth once again. Alexander stood up, walking over to the window and looking out at the city below. You've come a long way, he said quietly, almost to himself. I knew you had it in you. But this is just the beginning. There's more to do, more to prove. Maria nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She was ready for whatever came next. This was her chance, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. As the day went on, Maria continued to work through the documents, making adjustments and ensuring everything was in order. She felt the confidence growing inside her with every decision she made, every task she handled. She wasn't just following orders anymore. She was taking charge. By the time the day ended, Maria felt exhausted but fulfilled. She had done it. She had handled the project, caught the mistake, and proven that she was capable of more than anyone had expected. Alexander came by her desk before he left for the evening, his usual calm demeanor unchanged. You did well today, Maria, he said, his tone sincere. Keep this up, and you'll go far. Maria looked up at him, her heart swelling with pride. Thank you, she said quietly. I won't let you down. And as she left the office that evening, Maria couldn't help but smile. She was no longer just a maid in the shadows. She was a force to be reckoned with, and this was only the beginning. Maria sat at her desk, the weight of the day slowly settling on her shoulders. It had been a productive week. No, more than that. She had successfully handled 2 major projects, earned Alexander's trust, and started to build a reputation for herself. It was a lot to take in. Her life had changed dramatically since that fateful night when Alexander had seen her sitting alone in the rain. It felt like she was no longer just an observer of her own life, but an active participant. Yet, as satisfying as her progress had been, Maria knew there was still a long way to go. Alexander was not one to offer empty praise, and his expectations for her only seemed to grow with each success. This was no longer just about doing a good job. It was about proving herself capable of more. She had shown she could handle the day-to-day tasks, but could she handle the weight of decisions that would affect not only her future, but the future of the empire Alexander had built? She was sitting at the desk late one night when Alexander entered the office. He looked the same as always, immaculate, with an air of authority that never seemed to falter. But tonight, something was different. He seemed more serious, almost concerned. Maria, we need to talk, he said, his voice low. Maria stood up immediately, her heart skipping a beat. Of course, she replied, trying to mask the slight tremor in her voice. Alexander walked over to her desk, his hands resting lightly on the wood. There's a situation I need you to handle, he began, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity she had learned to recognize. It's not going to be easy, but I believe you're the right person for it. Maria felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This wasn't like the other tasks she had been given. This was something bigger. What's going on? She asked, her voice steady. But inside, she could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. Alexander sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. There's a deal in the works. A major one. But there's a problem. A few of our partners are starting to get cold feet, and I need someone I can trust to smooth things over. Someone who can handle the pressure. Maria blinked, her mind racing. She had never been involved in something like this before. Deals, negotiations, pressure on this scale. She had been working hard, but this was a whole new level. I'm not sure I understand, she said, trying to keep her composure. What exactly do you need me to do? Alexander paused for a moment, his gaze hardening. You need to meet with them. You'll represent me, and you'll make sure this deal goes through. You'll do what's necessary to keep them on board. Maria's heart raced. She wasn't used to playing this kind of role, and the thought of going up against seasoned business people was intimidating. But she had learned from Alexander that hesitation was not an option. She took a deep breath, her mind clearing. I can do it, she said, her voice firm. Alexander looked at her for a moment, as if weighing her resolve. Then he nodded. I knew I could count on you. You have the skills, Maria. Don't doubt yourself. He turned to leave, but then stopped and turned back toward her. One more thing, he said, his voice softer. I trust you to make the right decisions. Trust yourself, too. Maria nodded. But inside, she was fighting to contain the whirlwind of emotions that had surged within her. This was her test, her chance to prove that she was more than just a maid in the shadows. This was her opportunity to show that she could stand beside Alexander, that she could be more than what people expected of her. The meeting with the partners was set for the following day. Maria spent the entire evening preparing. She reviewed every document, every figure, every contract. She studied the faces of the men she would be meeting, learning as much as she could about their personalities, their weaknesses, their motivations. She didn't have the luxury of being unprepared. She had to be perfect. The next day, as she entered the conference room, Maria felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. The men who sat at the table were powerful, their faces hardened with years of business dealings. They looked at her with skepticism, but she refused to be intimidated. She took her seat at the head of the table, opposite them, her posture straight and confident. She could feel their eyes on her, sizing her up. But she didn't flinch. She had learned from Alexander that power came not just from what you did, but from how you presented yourself. And she was ready to show them who she was. Gentlemen, she began, her voice calm but strong. I understand there are some concerns about the deal, but I can assure you, this is an opportunity you don't want to pass up. She watched as they listened intently, their expressions unreadable. I'm here to address those concerns and ensure that this deal moves forward. I'll make sure that it benefits everyone involved. The meeting stretched on for what felt like hours. There were moments of tension, sharp words exchanged, but Maria held her ground. She knew when to push and when to back off. She could feel the respect building in the room as she spoke, as she handled the negotiations with a skill and poise that surprised even her. By the time the meeting ended, the deal had been sealed. The partners agreed to move forward, and Maria felt a sense of pride that she couldn't quite describe. She had done it. She had proven herself. As she left the room, Alexander was waiting outside. He looked at her with approval, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. You did well, he said. I knew you had it in you. Maria felt a rush of relief and pride. Thank you, she said softly. But Alexander didn't let the moment linger. This is just the beginning, Maria. Keep it up, and you'll be unstoppable. As she walked away, she couldn't help but feel that for the first time in her life, she had finally stepped into the person she was meant to be. Maria woke up early the next morning, the soft light of the sunrise casting a gentle glow through the window. It had been a few days since the meeting with the partners, and the satisfaction of that success still lingered in her mind. She had proven herself, but now there was more to be done. Alexander's words still echoed in her ears, his praise and the weight of the responsibility he had placed on her shoulders. The opportunity to make real change in the business was within her grasp, and Maria couldn't help but feel the excitement building. She had never imagined herself in this position, working side by side with one of the most powerful men in the city, managing crucial aspects of his empire. But now, as she stood in the mirror, preparing for another day, she realized that this wasn't just a job anymore. It was her life, and she was shaping it. She dressed quickly, a sense of purpose driving her actions. She wasn't the same Maria who had stepped into this mansion just a few months ago, uncertain and invisible. Now, she was someone who could make decisions, who was trusted. and who was beginning to realize her potential. The mansion, once a place where she quietly served, now felt different, like a space where she belonged. As Maria walked through the halls, she noticed the subtle changes. People greeted her differently, with respect, and even the other staff members no longer looked at her with the same indifference. They knew what she was becoming. She wasn't just another maid anymore. She was someone who could contribute, who could lead. When she entered the office, Alexander was already there, sitting at his desk, looking over some documents. He looked up when she walked in, his eyes scanning her for a moment before he offered a smile. "Morning, Maria," he said, his voice as steady as always. "We have a lot to do today." Maria nodded, her mind focused on the task ahead. "What's the plan?" she asked, standing across from him. Alexander pushed the papers aside and looked at her with a serious expression. "We need to talk about the future. The deal we worked on with the partners was just the beginning. Now, we have to solidify our position and make sure everything is in place for the next phase." Maria's heart began to race. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, feeling the weight of his words. Alexander stood up, walking toward the window, his back to her. "I mean that we're about to expand," he said, his voice calm, but with a hint of excitement. "There are opportunities to grow, to reach new markets, and to solidify our power in ways we haven't even begun to explore." Maria's mind was already working, processing the information. "And you want me to be a part of that?" she asked, trying to hide the awe in her voice. "Yes," Alexander said without turning around. "I've already made some moves, but I need someone I trust to take the lead. You've proven yourself, Maria. It's time for you to take the next step." Maria stood there, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always been cautious, never imagining that she could be a true player in this world. But now, it was clear that Alexander saw something in her that she hadn't yet recognized in herself. She wasn't just the maid. She was someone who could help guide this empire. "I won't let you down," Maria said, her voice steady with determination. Alexander turned, his eyes meeting hers. "I know you won't," he said simply. "But this won't be easy. We're going to face challenges, and there will be obstacles. You'll need to stay focused, Maria. You're not just representing yourself anymore. You're representing us." Maria nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. "Let's do this." Over the next few days, Maria worked tirelessly alongside Alexander, meeting with business partners, reviewing contracts, and navigating the complexities of expanding their influence. It was a whirlwind of activity, but Maria handled it all with a calm and collected demeanor. She had learned so much from Alexander: how to read people, how to negotiate, how to make decisions that would benefit the entire operation. She was no longer just a bystander. She was an active participant in shaping the future of their empire. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. As they pushed forward with their plans, Maria began to see the darker side of the business. The people they dealt with were ruthless, and not everyone shared Alexander's vision. There were moments when she felt uneasy, when she questioned the morality of the things they were doing. But Alexander was always there, guiding her, showing her that sometimes sacrifices had to be made for the greater good. "You'll understand soon enough," he had told her once, his tone serious. "This world isn't for the faint of heart. But if you want to survive in it, you have to be strong. You have to make tough choices." As the days turned into weeks, Maria found herself growing more confident. She was taking risks, making decisions that were starting to pay off. The business was expanding, and their influence was spreading. But even as her success grew, Maria knew that the price for this kind of power was high. There would be consequences, and she couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could keep her conscience clear. That night, after a particularly difficult meeting, Maria sat alone in her room, reflecting on everything that had happened. She had come so far, but she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was changing in her. She wasn't sure if it was for the better or the worse. But one thing was certain: she was no longer the same woman who had walked into this mansion months ago. She had become someone new, someone stronger, someone who could stand beside Alexander as an equal. And whatever the future held, she was ready to face it. Maria sat quietly in the corner of the study, a thick folder of financial projections in front of her. The mansion was eerily silent at this hour, the only sound being the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. She was used to this silence now, to the weight of the power she held in her hands. The business had been expanding rapidly, and Alexander's trust in her had never been more evident. She was no longer just a maid in the shadows. She was a key player in his empire. But with this new role came pressure, and Maria felt the weight of it more than ever before. She had to be perfect. The stakes had never been higher. The meeting with the investors the next morning would determine the next phase of their operations, and it was her responsibility to ensure everything went smoothly. As she reviewed the numbers, she couldn't help but feel the doubts creep in. What if she made a mistake? What if they questioned her decisions? She knew she couldn't afford to falter, not now. She had come too far. Maria leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. She thought back to how it all began. The first time Alexander had spoken to her, the first time he had seen something in her that no one else had. She had been invisible, just a maid, nothing more. And now, she was in the driver's seat, making decisions that would impact the future of the business. She had earned her place, but she hadn't yet earned the confidence she needed to make her own path. She stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the city. The night was quiet, the lights of the city below twinkling like stars. It was a beautiful sight, but it felt distant now. Maria had come to realize that the higher you climbed, the more isolated you became. Alexander had warned her about this, about the sacrifices she would have to make. She had seen it in him. The cold, calculated decisions, the emotional distance. And she was beginning to understand why he had become the way he was. The world they navigated was ruthless, and it demanded sacrifice. As she turned back to the desk, there was a knock on the door. She straightened up, quickly smoothing her clothes. "Come in," she called, her voice steady. The door opened, and Alexander walked in, his usual confident stride making her heart skip a beat. He looked at her for a moment, as if assessing her, before sitting down across from her. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Maria didn't answer right away. Instead, she met his gaze, wondering if he saw through the calm exterior she was trying so hard to maintain. "I'm ready," she said finally, her voice steady. "Everything is in place for tomorrow's meeting." Alexander nodded, his expression unreadable. "I know you are. I've seen how you've handled everything so far. You've come a long way." Maria felt a small surge of pride, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of the next step. "It's a lot to handle," she admitted. "There's so much riding on this, and I'm not sure I'm ready for the consequences if something goes wrong." Alexander's eyes softened slightly, and he leaned forward. "You've been more than ready from the start, Maria. I've watched you grow into this role. And no matter what happens, you won't be alone. I'm here." His words were simple, but they carried a weight she hadn't expected. It wasn't just reassurance, it was a promise. Maria took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief she hadn't realized she needed. "Thank you," she said quietly, looking at him with newfound respect. Alexander stood up, his expression returning to its usual intensity. "Tomorrow, we move forward. Together. Do your best, and everything will fall into place." As he walked out of the room, Maria sat back down at her desk, her mind racing once more. She had made it this far. She had proven herself time and time again. But tomorrow would be the true test. She would either sink or swim. The pressure was immense, but Maria knew there was no turning back now. She was a part of this world, and she was going to make her mark. She opened the folder in front of her again, reviewing the final details of the presentation. As she worked, her thoughts kept returning to the same point. She wasn't just playing a part anymore. She wasn't just following orders. She was leading, and in this world, that meant everything. As the night wore on, Maria stayed focused, determined to make the best of the opportunity Alexander had given her. She had worked too hard to let it slip away now. She had a chance to prove that she was more than just a maid in the shadows. She was Maria, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Maria stood at the large conference table, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the low murmur of voices behind her as the investors began to file in, each one carrying the weight of the deals they were about to discuss. This was it, her moment. The room was grand, the air thick with tension, but for the first time, she felt a strange calm. She had prepared for this day, studied every document, every figure, and now she was ready to take charge. As Alexander had said, there was no turning back. She had earned her place in this world, and she would make sure they knew it. The men in the room, powerful and seasoned in the world of business, all took their seats, their eyes briefly scanning her. Maria met their gaze confidently, a calm that surprised even her. She had learned quickly that the more confident you appeared, the more others would follow your lead. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was the one in charge, the one who had the power to influence the direction of their future. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice steady. "Thank you for joining me today. I'm here to discuss the future of our partnership and ensure we continue to grow and move forward." The men nodded, their expressions skeptical but attentive. They had expected Alexander, not her. They had expected a man of power to speak to them, not a woman who had once been just an employee in the mansion. But Maria wasn't concerned with what they expected. She was focused on what needed to be done. "I've reviewed the numbers," she continued, her tone firm. "And while things are moving in the right direction, there are areas we need to tighten up. I've outlined some key strategies that will help us maximize profit and minimize risk." She paused, watching their reactions. There was a moment of silence before one of the investors, a tall man with graying hair, spoke up. "I'm curious," he said, his voice laced with skepticism. "How do you plan to manage the risk in these areas? You're not exactly experienced in high-stakes business." Maria didn't flinch. She had been asked this question before, in smaller, quieter moments, but now it felt different. Now, she was ready. "I may not have years of experience in the business world," she said calmly, "but I've spent enough time learning from the best. And what I lack in years, I make up for in determination and attention to detail. We've already taken steps to address potential risks, and with the right strategy in place, we can ensure the growth of this company for years to come." The room grew quiet again as the investors absorbed her words. Maria could see them processing, weighing her response. She could feel the tension in the air, but she didn't let it shake her. This was her time. "I've also spoken to the key players who will be integral to making these changes," she added, "and they are fully on board. This is not just my vision. It's a vision we're all working toward." The investors exchanged glances, some nodding, others still uncertain. But the seed of doubt that had once existed in their minds began to fade. Maria could see it in their eyes. She was convincing them. She was earning their trust. "All right," the man with graying hair said finally. "Let's see what you've got." Maria opened the folder in front of her, laying out the detailed plans and projections she had prepared. She spoke with authority, walking them through each point, addressing every question they raised, and responding with confidence. She was no longer the person who stood on the sidelines. She was the one leading the discussion, the one making the decisions. It was a moment she had dreamed of but never truly believed would come. But now that it had, she wasn't going to waste it. The meeting lasted for hours, and by the time it was over, the investors were on board. They agreed to move forward with the plan she had laid out, impressed by her knowledge, her poise, and her ability to think on her feet. As the room emptied and the last of the men filed out, Maria stood there for a moment, alone. She couldn't help but let out a small breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She had done it. She had handled the pressure, made the right choices, and proven herself to everyone in that room. But more than that, she had proven something to herself. She wasn't just a maid in the shadows anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. Just then, Alexander walked into the room, his usual calm demeanor unchanged. But when he saw her standing there, his eyes softened. "Well done," he said, his voice low but full of admiration. "You handled that better than I expected." Maria smiled, a rush of relief flooding through her. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but filled with pride. Alexander nodded, walking over to her. "You've earned your place, Maria," he said, his tone more serious now. "You've shown that you can handle this world. And this is just the beginning. There's much more to come." Maria looked at him, her heart racing. This was what she had been working for, what she had dreamed of. And now that it was within her grasp, she was ready to take on whatever came next. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. "I won't let you down." Alexander smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know you won't." As he turned to leave, Maria stood there for a moment, her thoughts swirling. She had come so far. But now, she realized, the real challenge was just beginning. She had proven herself, but she knew that to truly succeed, she would have to stay sharp, stay focused, and keep moving forward. There was no going back. Now, she was part of this world, and she was going to make her mark. Maria sat at her desk, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the office. It had been another long day, filled with meetings and decisions, and yet her mind couldn't settle. There was always more to do, always something else to manage. The growth of the business had been swift, but with success came challenges that Maria hadn't fully anticipated. The pressure was starting to build, and she could feel it. As she glanced at the documents spread across her desk, her thoughts turned to Alexander. He had been so sure of her, so confident that she could handle everything. But what if he was wrong? What if she wasn't cut out for this? The doubt lingered for a moment, but Maria shook it off. She had come too far to let insecurity take hold now. She had proven herself before, and she would do it again. She had to. The sound of footsteps approaching the door broke her from her thoughts. She turned, expecting to see one of the staff members, but it was Alexander. His presence filled the room, as always, exuding confidence and authority. "You look deep in thought," he said, his voice low and calm. "Something on your mind?" Maria smiled faintly, trying to mask the unease that had been swirling in her chest. "Just thinking about everything we've accomplished and everything still left to do," she said, trying to sound more composed than she felt. Alexander nodded, stepping closer to the desk. "You've done a good job. Better than I expected, honestly." The words hit her harder than she expected. He had trusted her from the beginning, and his confidence in her had only grown. But as proud as she was of her progress, Maria couldn't help but feel the weight of his expectations. "I appreciate that," she said, meeting his gaze. "But there's still a lot more at stake. I feel like every move we make matters more now." Alexander leaned against the desk, his eyes studying her with an intensity she had grown used to. "You're right," he said after a moment. "But you're handling it well. I wouldn't have given you this responsibility if I didn't believe in you." Maria nodded, though doubt still lingered in the back of her mind. She had always been someone who hid in the background, content to stay out of the spotlight. But now, she was in it. Her decisions mattered. Her actions had consequences. "I don't want to let you down," she said quietly. Alexander's expression softened, and he reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not going to let me down, Maria. You've already proven you can handle this. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm here with you, every step of the way." His words were like a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge of uncertainty. She had been running on adrenaline, pushing herself harder each day, but hearing him say that calmed something inside her. She wasn't alone in this. She had earned her place, and Alexander had seen that. But there was more. He trusted her, not just as an employee, but as a partner, and that was a responsibility she couldn't take lightly. As Alexander stepped back, his eyes locking with hers, Maria felt a shift in the room. She was no longer just the woman who had been given a chance. She was part of something bigger. She was part of his vision, and together, they were building something that could last. "Let's keep pushing forward," she said, her voice steady. "There's more to accomplish, and I'm ready for whatever comes next." Alexander smiled, his pride in her unmistakable. "That's what I like to hear," he said, his voice full of approval. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but I have no doubt that you'll keep moving forward. You've got everything it takes to make this work." As he left the room, Maria sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on everything that had led her here. She had come a long way from the quiet, invisible woman who had once lived in the shadows of the mansion. Now, she was a force to be reckoned with, and she knew it. She was ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. But more than that, she was ready to prove to herself, and to Alexander, that she could handle whatever came her way. She wasn't just here to survive. She was here to thrive. And with that thought, Maria stood up, her resolve firm. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what it held. She had earned her place at the table, and she was ready to take on whatever came next. Maria stood by the window of her office, the weight of the past few months settling in her chest. She had come so far from the woman who had sat outside in the rain, eating a meal that had barely warmed her body. Now, she was standing on the edge of something much bigger, something she had never imagined she would be part of. The empire Alexander had built was hers to help shape, but with that power came its own set of challenges. Every decision, every move mattered. Maria knew that more than ever. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of meetings, deals, and hard decisions. But she had faced them head-on. She had learned to trust herself, to rely on the instincts she had developed under Alexander's mentorship. She had become a leader in her own right. As she looked out at the skyline, her thoughts drifted to the people who had once looked down on her. They had no idea who she had become, or what she was capable of. She had worked tirelessly to prove herself, to show that she wasn't just someone who served others. She was someone who could lead, who could make decisions that affected the future. And now, as she watched the sun set over the city, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. It wasn't just about the work or the success. It was about who she had become. She had earned her place in this world. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock at the door. She turned, expecting it to be one of the staff, but instead, it was Alexander. He walked into the room, his expression unreadable. He looked at her for a moment, as if taking in the change in her. "You've come a long way, Maria," he said, his voice low, but there was a warmth in it that hadn't been there before. Maria smiled, her heart swelling with the recognition. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, her voice steady, but her emotions running deep. "I've learned a lot from you." Alexander nodded, his gaze softening. "You've learned a lot, yes. But you've also taught yourself. You've come into your own in a way I never expected." Maria felt a lump form in her throat. She had worked so hard, and hearing him say that meant more than words could express. "Thank you," she said quietly. Alexander walked toward her, stopping just a few feet away. "There's one last thing I need from you," he said, his voice now more serious. Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had come to understand that when Alexander spoke like this, it meant something important was about to happen. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nerves rising within her. Alexander hesitated for a moment, then spoke with quiet intensity. "I want you to take over the business. Not just as my partner, but as the one who leads it. You've proven you're ready for this. I won't be around forever, and I need someone I can trust to continue what we've built." Maria blinked, the weight of his words hitting her harder than she had expected. This was the moment she had been working toward, the moment when everything she had done had led to this one decision. "You want me to take over?" she asked, barely able to believe the words coming from his mouth. "Yes," he replied simply. "I believe in you, Maria, more than anyone else, and I know you will lead this empire into the future." Maria felt the enormity of the decision settle on her shoulders, but she didn't shy away from it. She had been given a chance, and now, she was going to take it. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice strong and confident. Alexander smiled, a look of pride in his eyes. "I know you won't," he said. "You're ready for this, Maria. You've always been ready." As Alexander turned to leave, Maria stayed where she was, her mind racing with the realization of what had just happened. She was going to be the one to lead, to continue building what Alexander had started. She wasn't just a maid anymore, not even close. She was a powerful force in her own right, someone who could shape the future. She had earned this. And for the first time in her life, Maria didn't feel the weight of doubt. She felt ready. As the door clicked shut behind Alexander, Maria stood there for a moment, allowing the quiet to wash over her. She had come a long way, and now, it was her turn to lead. The future was uncertain, yes, but she wasn't afraid. She was ready to step into the role she had been preparing for all along. This was her moment, and she was going to make the most of it. She had become everything she had once dreamed of, and now, the world was hers to shape. In this captivating tale, Maria's transformation from an invisible maid to a powerful leader is told with rich emotional depth and intrigue. With themes of ambition, trust, and personal growth, this story unfolds like the most compelling romance stories, where the protagonist steps into her power through unexpected challenges and deep connections. As Maria navigates her evolving relationship with Alexander, the powerful figure who sees her potential, she begins to realize that her future holds far more than she ever imagined. Romance stories often focus on personal discovery and the bond between two characters, and this narrative explores how Maria comes to understand herself, her worth, and her role in a complex, high-stakes world. As she learns from Alexander, Maria's journey mirrors the emotional arcs found in romance stories, her courage growing with every decision, every challenge faced head-on. The stakes rise as Maria's relationship with Alexander evolves, and as the story reaches its conclusion, she faces a pivotal moment where everything she has worked for comes together. Romance stories captivate readers not only with love, but with the journey of self-empowerment, and Maria's story is no exception as she moves from doubt to confidence. Ultimately, Maria takes control of her destiny, stepping into a new chapter of her life, much like the heroines in the most unforgettable romance stories, proving that true strength comes from within.